as we know, in the first paper we looked at social forces in the development of sociological theory. So the outer context in which sociological theories emerged. So we looked at political revolution. We focused on French Revolution and the result of French Revolution in the society. And second, we looked at Industrial Revolution and the rise of capitalism, especially in the development of Marxian theorization or Weberian response to it. These are other theories also was a response to the Industrial Revolution and the rise of capitalism. And third, rise of socialism. And fourth, feminism, development of feminism. So because of these developments, capitalist, industrial revolution and other political revolutions, the new questions about gender and femininity raised. So their response also created a new wave in the society and led to the development of sociological theories. And fifth is urbanization, and sixth is religious changes. So because of this Enlightenment and Renaissance and other scientific developments, so religious what we call it, new phases of religious faiths also changed the social fabric, and people try to understand this change through sociological theories. And in the intellectual forces that rise sociological theories, the second, that outer or inner context in which sociologists are influenced. So there are different intellectual forces and for the rise of sociological theories. So like as I mentioned, Enlightenment, conservative reaction to Enlightenment, growth of science, in it like Copernican revolution and biological theory of evolution. All these intellectual forces influenced for the development of classical sociological theory. As we know, Durkheim's theory and his contributions. So I am not going into the details of his theoretical contributions. It basically focused on like study of social facts, and through which he looked at division of labor in society, or the social solidarity, different kind of social solidarity, and its effects on the phenomena of suicide, etc. So all his theory, as in a broader level, his theory was a response to the development of the modern society. And if you look at Marx's contribution, he also looked at post-industrial society and the division of the divisions on the basis of class, and he tried to analyze the process of alienation and how it creates conflict among different actors, and how it leads to the destruction of capitalist system. And if you look at Weber, he also looked at development of rationality or the process of rationalization in the society, and he tried to understand the development of modern institutions like bureaucracy, and how it work in a industrial or post societies. And he looked at the development of capitalism and how different superstructures like religion, especially Protestant ethics, created or contributed for the development of capitalism. So in his book Protestant Ethics and Spirit of Capitalism, he tried to understand, or he tried to respond to the theories of Marx and criticize his assumptions. So these are the three main classical sociological theories we looked at. When we are coming to modern sociological theory, we are focusing on post Second World War time. As we know, during this time, the theater of sociological theorization shifted into America. In geopolitical context, we know that after the Second World War, European powers are like European countries are got marginalized in the geopolitical scenario of the world, and America got prominence. And because of different geopolitical and social reason, like the decline of Nazism and fascism, and the development of the liberal idea of liberalism, the world order got changed. So in this time, as a response to this, the theater of sociological theorization shifted into America. As we know, different schools emerged in American subcontinent, like Chicago School, Harvard School, and Frankfurt or critical theory schools. So all these new or contemporary theoretical developments happened in America. So this is the socio-political and intellectual context in which modern sociological theories emerged. So in this background, we have to look at characteristics, features of a theory. So ideal theory, we will have 6 basic characteristics that can never be fully realized but can be approached to a varying degree. In the first 3 characteristics, Socrates introduced and argued for the first 3 of these when he said that a theory must explicit, first, second universal, and third abstract. And Descartes and Kant supplemented Socrates' 3 criteria with 2 more. Theory must be discrete and systematic. And finally, modern natural science have added further a criteria for ideal theory. It must be complete and predictive. These are the 6 basic characteristics of a theory. So we will look at it in details. in the first, theory must be explicit, because of a theory is to be laid out so clearly in such a detail and so completely that it can be understood by any reasoning being. A theory may not stand or fall on interpretation or intuition. So theory must be explicit. It should explain the phenomena in a very clear and correct manner. And second is, theory must be universal, in that it must apply in all place and all time. So the universalist nature of theory is that it should be applied in different it enable us to apply in different social contexts. And third, the abstractness of the theory. A theory must be abstract in that it must not require the reference to concrete examples. So abstractedness is the third characteristic features of theory. Fourth, a theory must also be discrete, that is, formulated only with the aid of context-independent elements, which do not refer to human interest, tradition, and institutions. So, the discreteness of theory, which focus on context-independent elements. And fifth is theory must be systematic, that is, it must constitute a whole in which context-independent elements, properties, and factors are related to each other by rules and laws. So the different variables of social phenomena must be interconnected and analyzed or systematically analyzed and predict or theorize. So sixth is, theory must be complete and predictive. The way of theory accounts for the domain it covers must be comprehensive in the sense that it specifies the range of variation in elements which affect the domain, and the theory must specify their effects. This makes possible precise predictions. So this completeness and predictiveness of theory help us to understand different variables and its changing and a nature of its change and its effects for the phenomena. So these are the 6 main characteristic features of theory. So far we discussed about different aspects of or different characteristics features of sociological theory and the context in which modern sociological theory emerged. Now we are looking at elements of theory. What are the different elements of theory? We know thus that there is 5 fundamental elements for a theory. First one is definition. So if you are looking at a phenomena or any such things, we have to define it. Without a proper and concrete definition, we cannot understand a phenomena and we cannot theorize a sociological process. So second one is concept. According to this definition, we have to develop different concepts. And third one is identifying different variables, and with these definition, concept and variables, we have to formulate some statement and create a format for a theoretical propositions. So these are the 5 important elements for a theory. And the process of theorization, or the level of theorization, we have to first the process of identification of the smallest unit and its characteristics. So, and then we have to look at the interactions among these units that leads to the formation of components and complexes in determinate ways. And next is statement that use concepts and their interrelations to indicate the nature of interactions and their result. Finally, frequent experimentation to arrive at the stated result, and if result shows difference, then the explain the differences and arrive at a revised statement. So these are the steps in the process of a theorization. So first identify the small unit and its characteristics, then understand the interrelationship among these units and how these units create a network and how it react or interact between each other. And third, properly state these relations and interrelations that and how it result and how what is its consequences, and make a concrete statement. And final stage is frequently look at these elements and their interconnections. If there is any variations or differences, explain that variations and differences in the context, in the particular context. So if we look at, for example, if you look at theory of suicide, so what the theory of suicide or the contribution of Durkheim to understand suicide, the process, the phenomena of suicide. Firstly, Durkheim clarified the term and locate 3 or 4 types of suicide and their natures. First, what he tried to explain, or he tried to define suicide and different types of suicide and its nature. Second, for each types, the existing data available in official records were classified in terms of their distribution in various social categories. This classification needed intelligence and brilliance of the author. So second level, he, according to the data, he classified the data according to these 4 types. So each types of suicide vary according to the data of social facts, and comparison were made. So he compared this data with his data with another type of suicide. So he classified the process of suicide into 3 or 4, then compared the data, the available official data, according to the categories, and he gave a proper explanation for each type of suicide, And finally, a theory of suicide was formulated in terms of the variation of degree of integrity or solidarity in society. So he explained that uh, this kind of suicide is more prevalent in this kind of society, in this kind of group. So because of this social solidarity or social integration, this kind of suicide happened in the society. So the steps we understood that first he defined the concept and defined the concept and understood and tried to understand the different variables and its interrelations and interconnections, and then stated or developed a format to understand this procedure, this social facts or the social phenomena. Likewise, if you look at theory of development of capitalism by Max Weber, he also followed the same pattern. So try to understand what is capitalism. He defined what is protest ethics and what is their ideal types. So the causes were both were Protestant and not present in the were identified. Comparison in the historical settings were attempt and existing data on the type of education prevalent in each religious group were compared and made conclusion about the rise of capitalism in the Protestant domain regions. And he questioned why it happened in this particular regions and explained the causes for the development of capitalism. So these are the steps involved in the theoretical formulation of Durkheim. So I'm not going into the details of this process, as we know that in the first paper we looked at a full module of module on Weber, module on Durkheim, and module on Marx. We had a detailed discussion about their contributions and the methodology they adopted to understand or theorize different social phenomena. So the course overall purpose or objective of the course is not to look at the individual concept or individual's contribution, but to understand how they came up with such a kind of theoretical formulas and how they methodologically how they understand the society and social phenomena in which they are trying to explain. So finally, we have to understand how the theorization process happened. So we know that there is a huge debate on facts and theory. So sometime we used to look at fact and theory as two different domains, and we know that in reality it is not true. Facts do not speak for themselves. They must be interpreted. Without an interpretation of facts, we cannot understand social reality. This interpretation always draw on taken for granted or implicit theoretical ideas that go beyond the facts and give them their meanings in some larger frame of reference. So without interpreting facts and their interconnection or interrelation of different facts, we cannot understand social reality and social world. So the theorization process mainly aims to do this particular function: interpret the facts, connect it with different other facts, and make some statements about the social phenomena. So far we looked at different aspects of theorization, different elements of theorization, and different steps for the process of theorization. In the upcoming modules, we will look at different schools of theory, from functionalism to postmodern sociological theories. So we will try to understand different developments in the post Second World War till recent time. Let us look at the second module, in which we are going to discuss about functionalism and neo-functionalism. In functionalist theory, we are looking at contribution of Talcott Parson and Robert K. Merton. And in neo-functionalist development, we are looking at Jeffrey Alexander's contribution. As we know, in the first module, we discussed about the social context in which sociological theory, especially modern sociological theory, developed and flourished. Before looking at functionalist theorizing, we have to look at the context in which this particular theoretical development happened in the discipline of sociology. As we know, the post-World War context, in which different kind of development, socio-political developments happen, modern sociological theory, especially functionalism, developed in that particular context, where domination of American geopolitical development in America and American political system, and the triumph of neoliberalism or liberal mode of economic action, and the comfort that provided by neoliberalism, neoliberal development, and the social order. So in this particular context, neo-functionalist theorization flourished, especially the contribution of Parson. So as we know, this Second World War, post-World War context helped to the development of functional theories in America. So as we know, in this module, we are looking at, as I mentioned, the contribution of Talcott Parson and Robert K. Merton for the development of functionalism, and the development of neo-functionalism in 1980s by Jeffrey Alexander. So as we know, Second World War, post-Second World War, we witnessed two major developments, especially in the context of theorization of social behavior. So one is consensus theories, and second one is conflict theory. The consensus theory see shared norms and values as fundamental to society and focuses on social order based on tacit agreements, and it views social change as occurring in a slow and orderly fashion. And second one is, in contrast to consensus theory, conflict theory emphasizes the dominance of some social groups by others, see social order as based on manipulation and control by dominant group, and it viewed social change as occurring rapidly and in a disorderly fashion as subordinated groups overthrow dominant groups. So these two theoretical development, consensus theories and conflict theory, dominated in Second World War or post-World War context. They are both macro-level theories focally concerned with large-scale social structures and social institutions. In the coming module, we are looking at conflict theories. In this particular module, we are looking at consensus theories, especially the development of functionalism and contribution of different sociologists. So, before going to theoretical formulas or postulates of functionalist theorization, we have to understand what is it mean by functionalism, function in functionalism. So we know that in popular discourse we used to in popular discourses we used to use the word function with different meaning in different contexts. So first, function often refers to some public gathering or festive occasions, usually connected with ceremonial overtone. Then second meaning is, the term is often equated with occupation. And thirdly, function is often used to refer to the activities assigned to the incumbent of a social status. And fourthly, function has got a mathematical meaning. It refers to a variable in relation to one or more variable in terms of which it may be expressed. So the mathematical function. So these are the four popular usages with reference to function. And fifth connotation, which is central to functional analysis. The inspiration behind this usage has been the biological science, where the term function is used to refer to these vital or organic process which contribute to the maintenance of the organism. So this usage, the biological science, the usage of function in biological science is adapted into the sociological theorization. So when we look at classical root of sociology, we see organic analogy of Spencer and different other sociologists, classical sociologists. So the function is equated to the functioning of different organism and its contribution to the working of a full body. So in sociology, functionalism was a theoretical perspective that emphasized that the part of a social system are interrelated in such a way that none of them can be fully understood except in terms of their effects on the other. So the interrelatedness or mutually constitutive nature of the social system is highlighted in sociological theorization or theoretical perspective of functionalism. So the comparing with organic body, the functionalist theorization stated that whole body is a product of different parts, interrelatedness of different parts. So the interrelatedness of different parts constitute the organism. Likewise, society is functioned by interrelated activities of different parts. So the function of this function, the function for the functionalist perspective can be found in writings of Auguste Comte, Herbert Spencer, and Emile Durkheim. So the classical root of functionalism is founded in classical sociologists like Comte, Spencer, and Durkheim, and also in the from anthropological perspectives like Malinowski and Radcliffe Brown's, their contribution, their studies in different parts of the world also contributed to the functionalist perspective. As the structural functionalism had enjoyed growing success in British anthropology since 1850s. They had based their theories on their study of primitive societies. Malinowski and Radcliffe Brown's studied primitive societies, and they developed functionalist perspective in 1860 onwards. But it was in the post-Second World War that functionalism assumed a position of authority and dominance in American sociology. For several decades, sociology, especially American sociology, was dominated by Parson and Merton. The focus of Parson and Merton studies was on the modern industrial society, especially American society. So whereas the classical anthropologists focused on primitive tribal communities. As we know, early structural functionalists were interested to understand how society passed through stages of development, how some societies progress more quickly than others, and the uniformity of social change across cultures. So, and they examined the ways in which societies exhibit tendencies towards social equilibrium and cohesion. Organic analogy of functionalism sought to understand scientifically how social systems operate in a manner akin to living organism. So these three are the basic features or basic postulates of classical functionalist theorization. So if you look at Auguste Comte's contribution, so three stages of social change, or the concept of Durkheim's concept of solidarity, organic and mechanical solidarity. All these theories, all these theorizations look at the progress or change on the basis of stages of development. So how and they look at how some society progress quickly compared to other societies. And they also try to understand how different societies exhibit tendencies towards social equilibrium and cohesion, how social order is maintained in different societies, and what are the contribution of different social systems and social institutions for that. And they also the contribution of Spencer. Spencer looked at functionalism, organic analogy to, as we mentioned earlier, the organic analogy to understand social system and social institutions. So, just as the human body, according to organic analogy, just as the human body, is comprised of functional components including heart, lungs, kidney, etc. Social institutions such as educational system, government, law enforcement, and media outlets were explained as functioning interdependently to form a stable social system. So, just as human body, different part of human body contribute to the functioning of the whole. In different social institutions such as educational system, government, law, police, or media outlet contribute to the proper functioning of social system. So, Functionalism argued that society should be understood as a system of interdependent parts where social institutions exist because they have to meet certain functional prerequisites. So, specific requirements necessary for the existence of society. The function of interdependent part will contribute or will lead to the proper functioning of the society. So, this is the organic analogy developed by different classical social thinkers. So, we looked at contribution of classical sociologists for the development of sociological functionalist theory, and the contribution of British anthropologist, social anthropologist. So, let us look at the contribution of Talcott Parson for the development of classical development of functionalist theory, modern functionalist theory. So, as we know, Parson studied in London School of Economics with Malinowski, and his views on society as a social system of interrelated parts influenced him. And also Parson attended University of Heidelberg in 1926, where he studied the theory of Max Weber and engaged with Weber's notion of individual is a rational thinking agency, unlike earlier theorists who talked of individual behavior as purely socially constructed, influenced by the social structure. So, the idea of rationality and rational individual developed by Max Weber influenced Parsons' career. And he was also influenced by Sigmund Freud, and thus took an interest in how actors or individual chooses goals and means in relation to the internalized norms and values. So, these three intellectual influence helped Parson to develop his theory. When we look at his contribution into functionalism or different ideas of functionalism, we can realize the importance of these three individuals in his intellectuals in his life. His theory was aimed at defining the relationship between structure and personality or individual. He argued the individual or agency as the reference point whose action is influenced by the social system in which he is located, but at the same time whose action can influence the social system. So he emphasized the importance of the relationship between structure and personality. Social structure and individual are the two components of functionalist theorization. And also he took individual agency as a reference point to look at social action. At the same time, he realized the importance of social system in the constitution of individual agency. So he understood the mutual constituent nature of social structure system and the individual. So his core focus was the analysis of structure of the social system, that is society, and its subsystem, different social institutions and structures, and their consequences for or functional relevance in maintaining society, social order and equilibrium. The society and different social function of the social structure and different subsystems and its contribution for the maintenance of social order and social equilibrium. So this is the base of Talcott-Parsons' theoretical development. So as we know, he took social action, individual and social action as his core of his theoretical development. So he developed in his early career, he developed a theory of voluntaristic social action. So according to him, social action theory is background for his functional analysis of social system. Without understanding the social action, we cannot understand social system properly. So social action has following characteristics. One, it is a goal directed or has an end, and social action takes place in a situation that provide means individual can use to achieve their goals, plus conditions the actors cannot change. And thirdly, social action is normatively regulated with respect to the choice of both end and means. So these three characteristics, goal and means and the regulation of this means, ends and means. These three characteristics decide the nature of social action. So social actor, an end and a concrete situation and a normative value orientation is important to function a society or to it is an important component of a social action. So the voluntaristic theory of social action is that an individual make choices, but their choices are normatively regulated with regards to goal of individuals pursue and the means they employ to reach these goals. So the voluntaristic theory of social action played an important role in the theory of Talcott Parsons. So through voluntaristic theory of social action, he explained how individual or the actor contribute for the functioning of society at large. So in his theory of social system, Parsons regarded all social units, whether group, institution or whole society, as a self-contained social system. So society, according to Parsons, is a self-contained social system, whether it is a social unit or group or social institution. So, and society divided into four primarily subsystem of action. According to Parsons, it is economy, politics, law and culture. So he developed AGIL scheme to understand the action of subsystems. So there are, according to him, these functional requirements of society as an action system compose four subsystems of action. The AGIL scheme proposed four functional imperatives for all action system. He believed that there are four functional imperatives that are necessary for the or characteristics of all subsystem. Let us look at what is this scheme. What is his talk about? One is A stand for adaptation to the environment or economic production. Second is goal attainment, the political system in democratic society, the goal of equality and universal rights. So, and third one is integration into the social community by articulating and enforcing society's collective norms. And fourth is latency or pattern maintenance, the intergenerational transmission of society's generally shared values through socialization. So these four functions, core functions, help to the maintenance of social system and social order and equilibrium. So the adaptation function or the goal attainment, the integration or pattern maintenance, all these schemes, functional requirements help a system or a subsystem to maintain social order and equilibrium. So the adaptation means a system must cope with external situational exercise. It must adapt to its environment and adapt to the environment to its needs. So adaptation means the system should adapt to its environment. At the same time, it should adapt it to its environment needs. So, second one is goal attainment. A system must define and achieve its primary goals. Without defining or without proper understanding of goals, system cannot function. And integration function, a system must regulate the interrelationship of its components part. It also must manage the relationship among the other three functional imperatives. So for the integration of a system, it should regulate the interrelationship of different components, and it also must manage the relationship among the other three functional imperatives: adaptation, goal attainment, and latency. The fourth one, pattern maintenance. A system must furnish, maintain, and renew both the motives of individual and the cultural patterns that create and sustain the motivation. So, for latency or pattern maintenance, system must furnish, maintain, and renew both motives of individual and cultural patterns. The interconnection between individual and cultural patterns must be maintained properly. Without this maintenance, the functioning of a system will be difficult. So, in this context, he developed 4 action systems. One is the behavioral organism, in which the action system that handle the adaptation function by adjusting to and transforming the external world. The behavioral organism help the system to adapt, to maintain to the functioning of adaptation. And the first personality system perform the goal attainment function by defining systems goal and mobilizing resources to attain them. And social system cope with the integration function by controlling its components part. And finally, the cultural system performs the latency function or pattern maintenance by providing actors with the norms and values that motivate them for action. So these 4 action systems help a society to perform its function. So systems has the property of order and interdependence of parts. System tend towards maintaining order or equilibrium, or the system may be static or involved in an ordered process of change. The nature of one part of a system has an impact on the form that other system can take. These are 4 important postulates of functional theory of Parson. He developed with reference to his theory of social action and social system. So According to him, systems' maintenance of boundary with their environment and allocation and integration are two fundamental processes necessary for a given state of equilibrium in society. And systems tend towards self-maintenance, involving the maintenance of boundaries and of the relationship of part to the whole, control of environmental variations and control of tendencies to change the system from within. So these are the functions performed by the social institutions. So with these activities, with these functions, system try to maintain its boundaries and help to maintain the equilibrium of a system, and it's also control or help for the controlled social change. So these are the important postulates or important points developed by Parson. So Parsons tried to develop a highly abstract, generalizable sociological theory that would be universally applicable, and he adopted a system approach to social theory. So in this context, Merton, his student and an eminent American sociologist, criticized his theory, his grand theorization, and also the abstractedness of his theories, abstractedness of his theorization. So he looked at the classical roots of sociological theory, classical roots of functionalism, and analyzed contribution of Comte, Spencer, Durkheim, and the contribution of anthropologists like Malinowski and Radcliffe Brown. And he developed his criticism against the existing functionalist theorization. He criticized three basic postulates of functional analysis. First one, the first is the postulates of functional unity of society. These postulates hold that all standardized social and cultural beliefs and practices are functional for society as a for society as a whole, as well as for individual in society. So the second postulate, universal functionalism, that is, it is argued that all standardized social and cultural forms and structures have positive function. Merton argued that this contradicts what we find in the real world. It is clear that not every structure, customs, ideas, belief, and so forth have positive function. The third postulate is indispensability. The argument here is that all standardized aspects of society not only have positive function but also represent dispensable part of the working whole. These postulates lead to the idea that all structures and functions are functionally necessary for the society. So the criticism of these three postulates led to the development of his notion of functionalist theory. So he tried to understand dysfunction, non-function, and different kind of function like manifest and latent functions. So without understanding these three variations of functions, we cannot understand functionalist theory. So according to him, dysfunction and non-function is equally important to understand function. In Parsons' theorization, or in classical sociological and anthropological theorization of function, they focused on the notion of function. They omitted, or they did not pay much attention to the notion of dysfunction and non-function, or different aspects of function, latent and manifest functions. So he focused on dysfunction and non-function. Merton developed the idea of dysfunction. Just as structure of institution could contribute to the maintenance of their other parts of social system, they also could have negative consequences for them. So the dysfunction, the negative effects of function should be understood properly to understand function. And Merton also posited the idea of non-function, which he defined as consequences that are simply irrelevant to the system under consideration. Included here might be social forms that are survivals for earlier historical time. Although they may have had positive or negative consequences in the past, they have no significant effect in the contemporary society. So non-function, that function don't have any effects on the present social system. So he looked at different examples and tried to understand how these two variation of functions contribute differently for the maintenance of the social system. And another contribution of Merton was his notion of the division of functions into manifest and latent. In his theory, he made an important distinction between motives for and the consequences of action. Based on that, he distinguished between two types of functions. One is manifest function and other is latent. In the manifest function, those objective consequences controlling to the adjustment or adaptation of the system, which are intended and recognized by the participant in the system. And latent functions, those objective consequences which are neither intended nor recognized. So manifest functions are those that are intended whereas latent functions are unintended. So these two functions should be understood properly. Then only we can understand the social action and the function and its contribution for the maintenance of social system. And another contribution of Parson for the theory, for the development of modern functionalist theory, was its idea of middle range theory. So as we know, Parson advocated the creation of grand overarching theories, while Merton favored more limited and middle range theories. Middle range theories are those that are closely tied to the empirical reality in society, articulated the relationship that exists among particular variables. So instead of looking at social system as a whole, middle range theory focused on small variables or the relationship of different variables. Merton emphasized that the main task should be the development of sociological theory applicable to limited range of empirical data, instead of looking at system as a whole. So these are the two more important contribution of Parson. One, looking at function from a different perspectives. Second is developing a middle range theory and focusing on small aspects of society to understand society as a whole, instead of looking at society at a large. So to sum up, Merton's paradigm of functional analysis involves investigating the consequence of recurrent or institutionalized pattern of action, whether consciously intended or not, and evaluating them in terms of whether they are functional, dysfunctional or non-functional for the various systems in which they are embedded. And second, Merton's work was not intended to provide a comprehensive explanation of individual social behavior or the overall society. Instead, he focused on specific and limited problems. He focused on developing a middle range theory. So these are the contributions of Robert K. Merton. Now we are looking at neo-functionalism developed in 1980s by Jeffrey Alexander and his So as we know, functionalism was dominated in American sociology in 40s, 50s and even in 60s, early 60s. So decline of functionalism, functional theory that occurred by the late 1960s corresponded with several interrelated changes in American society. So first one is the Vietnam War and anti-war movement, along with growing influence of civil rights movements. So we witnessed the changes in social fabric of American society that order, equilibrium, all created or created by the post Second World War situation started to decline, and America's involvement in Vietnam and and other part of the world created unrest in the country, and people started to protest against war and other issues. So the civil right movements in the country led to the development of different theoretical developments. So as we know, it led to the decline of functionalist theorization. And second one is the growing popularity of Neo-Marxist perspective, particularly the earlier philosophical and humanistic writings of Marx. The Neo-Marxist traditions started getting hold in American academia, and as we know, the development of critical thinking and other developments. And we know that the Parsons' image of widespread value consensus underlying and supporting the major institutional structure through which social equilibrium is maintained, that kind of idea got attention during the post-World War time. But now the new situation changed. The changes in the new situation led to the decline of this kind of Parsonian ideas. So in this context, functionalist theorization got declined in 60s and 70s. So in this context, in late 80s, Jeffrey Alexander, another American socialist, tried to develop a new form of functionalist theorization. So he defined neo-functionalism. He and Paul Colombi tried to define neo-functionalism as a self-critical standard of functional theory, a self-critical strand of functional theory that seeks to broaden functionalism's intellectual scope while retaining its theoretical core. So it is a self-critical strand of functional theory. At the same time, it tried to maintain or retain its critical core. Alexander have enumerated the problems associated with structural functionalism that neo-functionalism need to address, including the anti-individualism, antagonisms to change, conservatism, idealism, and anti-empirical bias. He finds these 5 problems of functionalism should be addressed to revive this theoretical perspective in new social and cultural situation. And along with this, in 60s and 70s, we witnessed the development of conflict theory and micro-theoretical analysis like symbolic interactionism, phenomenological perspective, etc. and it dominated in the American theoretical sphere. And also in 70s, a number of theories devoted considerable attention to try integrate micro and macro level of analysis, or to theorize focusing on human agency versus those focusing on social structure. So all these developments motivated Jeffrey Alexander and his colleagues to revive functionalism and development of neo-functionalist perspective. So Jeffrey Alexander looked at Parsonian theory as a point to begin his synthesis of his synthetic social theory. He approached the interdependent dynamics of social action and order with multidimensional analysis. He maintained that though social process facilitates social order through normative commitment, yet it is important to recognize the existence of conflicting interest, environmental conditions and constraints, and the unforeseen contingencies actors face while dealing with particular situations they find themselves in. So, without understanding these dimensions, we cannot understand social system in the new context. So, according to him, the important characteristics features of neo-functionalism are: 1. Neo-functionalism provides a descriptive view of society, which look at society comprising different components, each of them forming interaction patterns. So, neo-functionalism takes micro and macro forms of social phenomena into account. As we know, the functionalist theorization mostly focused on macro social realities and more macro social systems. He tried to address micro social phenomena in his theory. It views conflictual situation as a part of social system. So the conflict or the social change due to social conflict is absent in functionalist theorization. He incorporated conflictual situation as a part of social system. And fourth one, there is a concern of equilibrium within neo-functionalism, but it is broader than structural functional concern, encompassing both moving and partial equilibrium. And to push neo-functionalism to the left and rejects Parsons' optimism about modernity. He pushed his functional theories to more Marxian or more leftist perspective. So these are the main characteristics features of functionalism. So before concluding the lecture, let us summarize main points of functionalist theorization. So we started with the contribution of classical and classical sociologist for the development of functionalist theory, and also the contribution of British anthropologists like Malinowski and Radcliffe Brown. And then we looked at what is the function and how the concept is defined by different theorists, and we looked at contribution of Parson, in which we sought to develop, and we had understand that he sought to develop a highly abstract generalizable sociological theory that would be universally applicable, and he adopted a system approach to society. And we understood that each society, according to him, each social system has four primary subsystem of action, that is adaptation, goal attainment, integration, and pattern maintenance. And according to him, social action is voluntaristic. That means actors choose among various culturally bonded goals and means. So, structural functionalism, according to him, focuses on the functional relevance of social structure, and it maintains systems, equilibrium, and social order. So, these are the important contribution of Parson, and he also developed the concept of pattern variables. So, according to him, the social actions are patterned value orientation, determining how society and its subsystem function. So, there are 5 pattern variables. One is universalistic versus particularistic, specificity versus diffusiousness, achievement versus ascription, neutrality versus affectivity, self versus collective orientation. These pattern variables decide the nature or the value orientation of the function performed by society or its subsystems. And as we know, Parsons influenced many sociologists, including Robert Merton. He developed middle range theory, and we discussed it about middle range theory in detailed manner. And according to him, there are different types of functions: manifest functions, latent functions. So, without or non-function, dysfunctions and dysfunctions. Without understanding all this complex nature of functions, we cannot understand social system at a large. So, he developed his own, he added different things into the functionalist analysis. And later, Jeffrey Alexander developed Neo-Functionalism, and we discussed its different characteristics and the context in which he developed or he revived functionalist theorization in late 80s. So, we stop here. Friends, in this module, we are going to discuss about conflict theory and contribution of different sociologists for the development of conflict theory. As we know, in the previous module, we discussed about consensus theories, especially the contribution of Parson, Merton, and Jeffrey Alexander, in which if we focused on the shared norms and values as fundamental to society, focused on social order based on tacit agreements, and view social change as occurring in a slow and orderly fashion. Here we are looking at conflict theory, which emphasizes the dominance of some social groups by others, see social order as based on manipulation and control by dominant groups, and it views social change as occurring rapidly and in a disorderly fashion as subordinated groups overthrow dominant group. So we know that in the modern sociological theories, the theater of theorization shifted to America during and after Second World War, where the influence of liberal capitalism and its different welfare activities created a kind of stability and social order. So in this context, functionalist theorization emerged in America, and it dominated in the theoretical sphere of the country. But this situation changed in 60s and 70s, especially after America's involvement in Vietnam and subsequent development, especially the emergence of anti-war movements and civil liberty movements across the country, and the emergence of Soviet Union in parallel with American domination. All these developments, all this context created an atmosphere to think about conflict and social change. The stability and the equilibrium of social systems has changed, and now we have to address this new situation. So different thinkers, sociologists, invested their time and intellectual capacity to understand this new phenomena. So they tried to look at social context from a new perspective. So that is conflict perspective. As we know, different thinkers, classical thinkers, especially Karl Marx, Max Weber and George Simmel, all of them try to understand conflict from different perspectives. So their contribution and their intellectual heritage helped modern sociologists, especially Simmer, Kosser and Dahrendorf, to think about conflict as an important social process to understand modern society. Before going to the details of their contribution, we just have to make a comparison, a quick comparison between functionalist theorization and conflict theorization. It will help us to understand some quick point about conflict theory and with reference to functionalist theorization. First one is, to the functionalist, society is static or in a state of moving equilibrium. But to the conflict theorist, every society at every point is subject to process of change. So functionalist theories emphasize on the static or equilibrium nature of the society, whereas conflict theorists focus on the process of change. Second one is, functionalists emphasize the orderliness of society. Conflict theorists see dissensions and conflicts as very point in a social system. For functionalists, order is an important social situation, whereas conflict theorists, conflict or dissension is the nature of society. And third, functionalists argue that every element in society contributes to the stability. Conflict theories see many societal elements as contributing to disintegration and change. Conflict theories focus on the contribution of different elements, social institutions, social phenomena, social facts for the disintegration and social change. Whereas functionalists look at social institution, different social situations, social facts for the contribution of stability and order in the society. Functionalists focus on the cohesion created by shared social value. Conflict theorists emphasize the role of power in maintaining order in society. So both theories look at how social order is maintained in modern society, in which functionalists focus on different focus on shared social value for the creation of order in the society. In contrast, conflict theories emphasized on the role of power, how different power, it may be state, family, religion, or different kind of power operate in the society, and how it create order and how it maintains social order in the society. So these are the important points, important differences between functionalist theory and conflict theory. So in this context, it is hard to escape from the presence of conflict and competition at all levels of social world, from the micro world of family to macro world of nation state. So if you look at social system, we cannot ignore the presence of social conflict. So from the micro level of family relations to the presence of conflict in between nations and other macro institutions. So conflict theorists emphasize that the need and interest of different people and different groups are often incompatible and contradictory. The root causes of the conflict is these differences in interest and the conflict with regards to the distribution of scarce material and financial resources. This situation create or force society to interact between in a conflictual manner. So, conflict is an important source of social change. And conflict theories has focused about different dimensions of social change through conflict. As I mentioned earlier, there are different routes for conflict theory from Marx, Weber and George Simmel. So let us look at the contribution of Louis Coser for the functional analysis of conflict. Louis Coser analyzed conflict from a functionalist perspective. From the previous module, we came to understand that during the 50s, 60s and 60s, early 60s, functionalist theory or the contribution of Parson and his Parsonian functionalist theory was dominated in social theories in America, and it is very difficult to ignore functionalist perspective and its intellectual legacy. So different thinkers, different sociologists and social theorists engaged with Parsonian functionalism from different perspective. So Louis Coser analyzed conflict from a functionalist perspective. He developed the idea of conflict functionalism, and he criticized the functionalist emphasis on value or normative consensus, order and harmony. Coser's perspective was based heavily on the idea of George Simmel and the way in which he criticized Marxian framework and tried to understand conflict from a new perspective. So when we look at Coser's contribution to functionalist theory, Coser's contribution to conflict theory, we have to understand three dimensions of conflict. One is conflict between groups and in-group solidarity. How conflict between groups create in-group solidarity. The positive function of conflict can be seen when conflict between groups promotes solidarity within the group. So, as we know, the conflict between different groups create solidarity within the group. So if you look at different examples, like in a macro level, the conflict between two countries create and will lead to the unity of the group, of in group. So when you look at precisely when you look at the macro level groups like family, if there is a dispute or conflict between different families, the members of family will unite and we can see some kind of a unity within that group. So in the absence of external conflict, individuals often have greater freedom from group pressure for conformity, so they can pursue their personal interest, and this can lead to various forms of internal competition and conflict. So the presence of conflict between groups help groups to maintain solidarity within the group. So as we know, in this context, the conflict between different groups have a positive function. So, and if you look at the conflict within the group, it also has some positive function. Sometimes conflict within the group also create some kind of solidarity within the group. So conflict between the group and conflict within the group have some positive function. And his third proposition was on realistic and non-realistic conflict. Kosar makes a crucial distinction between realistic and non-realistic conflict in terms of the extent or types of change it may stimulate. The realistic conflict can be a strategy for removing or at least reducing the underlying cause of conflict without destroying the relationship. He pointed out that a social system may have high solidarity and integration at the same time that its members engage in a realistic negotiation of conflict issues. In contrast, non-realistic conflict involves the expression of hostility as an end in itself. Such conflict is often deflected away from the real object of conflict onto a safeguard. So the realistic and non-realistic conflict have different functions to perform in the society. So, the conflict, according to Coser, have different functions. First one, it increases the level of innovation and creativity of the system unit. And second, it releases hostilities before the polarized system unit. Third, it promotes normative regulation of conflict relations. Fourth, it increases awareness of realistic issues. And finally, conflict increases the number of associative coalitions among social units. So these are the important functions of social conflict according to Coser. When we look at Dahrendorf, he was a German sociologist. He witnessed the emergence of Nazism and its effects on German society. He engaged in political issues and at the same time worked as a social theorist. He appointed as the director of LSE, and he published his major book Class Conflict in Industrial Society in 1959. So this intellectual background, his time of his spatial and temporal location, early 20s, and his location in Germany, all helped him to look at society from a different perspective. So, according to him, society has two phases. One is conflict and second is consensus. Sociological theories therefore should be divided into two parts: conflict theory and consensus theory. According to him, consensus theory should examine value integration in society, and conflict theory should examine conflicts of interest and the cohesion that holds society together in the face of these stress. So we don't have to look at these two theories. So we discussed the first part, how consensus theory and theory is different from conflict theory and all. So some of his arguments are: normalcy of intergroup conflict in society is in response to unequal distribution of power and authority. So, according to him, the main reason for the conflict is the unequal distribution of power and authority. So, the group conflict arises when the manifest interest of one group are at odds with those of other. The conflict, the prime cause of conflict is the difference or the difference between groups and their interest. So, intergroup conflict is institutionally regulated in a democracy, democratic industrial societies, and hence typically does not lead to violence. So, according to him, in each and every society there are unequal distribution of power and authority. It leads to the conflict. It leads to the differences of interest between different groups. So, to regulate these interest and conflict in each and every society, there are different mechanisms, so that we can reduce violence in the society. Group conflicts can be functioned to produce social change resulting from its institutional resolution. According to him, group conflict can function to produce social change. And in contemporary society, occupational mobility and existence of many occupational groups and economic classes undermine the applicability of Marx's understanding of polarized class conflict. So, according to Marx, the interest of different classes and their struggle to acquire material benefit was the prime causes for the conflict, whereas for Darren Duff, the main causes for the conflict is the need for the authority or power. So he focused on the notion of authority and how authority or authoritarian notion create social conflict and social change. So he developed a concept called imperatively coordinated associations, or ICA, to understand the conflict situation. Central to Darendorf's thesis is the idea that various positions within society have different amount of authority. So, with this different groups, different people acquire authoritative position in society. So, the distribution of authority is the prime basis for class formation. For class formation, the distribution of authority is very important. as we discussed for Marx, the distribution of material benefits, material are the prime causes of the class formation. And Darendorf was interested not only in the struggle for these authoritative position, but also in the conflict among them. So, how this how the social system contribute for the structure, for the development of social structure, and how it leads to the social change. This was the prime concern of his theory. Based on authority, Darendorf argued that society is composed of a number of units that he called imperatively coordinated association. So, we discussed that there are different authoritative positions people hold in the society, and so society is, according to him, composed of a number of units. So there are different units. He called them as imperatively coordinated associations. So ICA is or imperatively coordinated association is an association of people controlled by a hierarchy of authoritative position. So it is an aggregate of those who dominate and subjected. So there are dominated group and subordinated groups. He regarded conflict as inevitable because of the divergent class interest of those at different level in the hierarchy of power and authority in this organization. So, in contrast to Marx's focus on ownership or lack of ownership of the means of production, Darendorf argued that control is the crucial factor, not ownership. So, the control over the means of production is more important than the ownership or lack of ownership of the means of production. So Darendorf focused on control over the ownership of the control over the means of production, and he explained how super and subordinated groups in imperatively coordinated associations would become organized to pursue conflict of varying degree of intensity and violence. How this superordinated and subordinated groups in imperatively coordinated associations work, and how or the intensity of the violence and conflict create social change in the society. So he developed a dialectical model of conflict in imperatively coordinated associations. According to him, we can see a legitimated role relationship in imperatively coordinated associations. So that role will leads to dichotomous authority relations between super and subordinated subordinated rules. It will lead to opposed quasi groups in terms of their level of authority. It leads to the emergence of opposed quasi groups in imperatively coordinated associations, among the imperatively coordinated associations. The growing awareness of opposed interest of members in quasi group. So this situation will increase, or it will Karl Marx term, it create a class consciousness among the group and among or between the group, and it will leads to emergence of conflict group. So this consciousness of those class consciousness or consciousness of their social position will leads to conflict, varying level of intensity and violent conflict, and finally it will result in redistribution of authority in ICAS. So this is the dialectical model of conflict proposed by Dahrendorf. This chart will help us to make a comparison between a dialectical model of Karl Marx in its analytical and empirical manner, and we can look at the Dahrendorf's empirical categories in the understanding of conflict among imperatively coordinated associations. This chart, as I mentioned in the previous slide, show the trajectories of the development of conflict in a society and its function, its a result, or its result as the creation of or redistribution of authority in the society. So this is the overall contribution of Dahrendorf for the development of conflict theory.